Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming. So as Jorge had mentioned in my intro, the Undocu Network was started in the middle of the pandemic, the start of the pandemic, 2020. And it really stemmed from the work I had done at Loyola Marymount with Dr. Cecilia Gonzalez Andrieu, who has been a part of the Ignatian Solidarity Network for years now. And through her and LMU, I was actually able to attend my first IFTJ conference in 2019. And that's where I met Marina, back when Jose was working for ISN. And at IFTJ in 2019 is where I actually met other students that were impacted by immigration directly. So there was a group of us that were either DACA holders, or fully undocumented, or various forms of immigration statuses. And from hearing their stories and talking to people like Marina, I realized that a lot of students across the country, specifically at various Jesuit institutions, didn't have the same support that I had at LMU. So a lot of students didn't know if there were other documented students on their campus. They didn't even know if faculty knew what it meant to be DACA or undocumented. And so fast forward to 2020, I've been working with Dr. Cecilia and thinking of how can we sort of branch out this sort of support, especially given the pandemic. There was a lot of uncertainty, feelings of isolation, fear, especially within the immigrant community. So with this all in mind, I came to Jose, who had been working at ISN, and said, what if we made a national network that connected all of the Jesuit institutions and brought together anybody that was impacted by immigration, whether they were DACA, whether they were fully undocumented, and later we expanded to mixed status students as well, like Jonathan. So that's really where everything started, just the idea of bringing people together who maybe didn't have resources at their campus, and then through that community building, people will be able to take back their learnings to their campus and expand the resources there. I don't know, Marina, if you want to add anything.
Hi. As Camila had mentioned, there wasn't anything at Detroit Mercy when I first started. And when I met Camila and I heard everything that LMU had, I was just like, that's insane. Like, I didn't even know anyone. At the time, I was a DACA recipient, and I didn't know anyone who had DACA. I didn't know anyone who was undocumented. And she was kind of like my inspiration to wanting to start something on campus. But at some point, early 2020 was when Camila and Jose had reached out to me and said that, Camila had this vision and asked if I'd want to be a part of it. And I was like, absolutely. I would love to be a part of the start of something that could reach out nationwide and just continue to provide support for others like me at the time who didn't have any support.
Thank you for that. And I wonder, Jonathan, for you, how you first got involved with the Undocu Network, if you can tell us a little bit about that part of the history.
Yeah, of course. So, hello, everybody. Just for context, I believe that stating this is essential just to know where I am and also just understand the story. I think my involvement with Undocu Network is very unique in the sense that it brought me to a place where I'm able to now be within the network, participate in leadership positions, and also give back to my community, whether that is, inspiring others to pursue things that they're passionate about, and also, be able to support other people that don't have the same resources that I do. That being said, I'm a U.S. citizen, but I am fully committed to this nonprofit organization for the full purposes of understanding that there are people like me who grew up in the United States but were born and raised by people who were either undocumented or had, other documentation statuses that weren't like U.S. citizens. And so that is all to say, in 2023, I participated in Undocu Network with their second annual retreat or summit, the Undocu Network Summit in California. The whole process in getting into that summit was very unique as well. So essentially, when I was a student at Boston College, I just graduated this past May, but when I was a student in Boston College in 2023, I was doing research with a federally funded program called the McNair Scholars Program that allowed me to do an independent research study on the lack of, or on why some DACA college students were able to graduate from college and why others weren't. And I had a research supervisor, Dr. Raquel Muniz, who was aware of my interest in supporting other people who didn't have the same documentation status as I did. And she was also coincidentally involved with ISN, the parent group of Undocumented Network. That is all to say, the way I got involved was almost like a once in a lifetime kind of opportunity. Dr. Raquel Muniz, my McNair research supervisor, who knew about me, knew of Undocumented Network, a nonprofit that just opened, or that just started up, and she forwarded me a application to attend the summit, which is again held on a weekend. Applying was easy, but the thing that was hard was the affording the transportation to go from Boston College to California on a last minute notice, on a March when there's midterms and all that other stuff. So it was hard to just find money, but luckily I was able to connect with the Boston College Center for Human Rights and International Justice to receive enough funding to go round trip to this last minute event. And after that, two things happened. One, I attended the summit. That's how to answer your question.
Thanks.
I attended the summit. That's how I started my participation. But it didn't cease there. I continued to, participate on Undocumented Network by having a lasting impression during my time at the summit. Another thing that happened was the compromise to getting the financial support from the center at school was to go back to campus the following semester as a junior and present my experiences, not only from where I come from, but also my experiences attending the summit. It's a unique way to, utilize financial support from an institution to be able to have opportunities. But it was one of those kind of things that I knew that being able to present was not going to be a burden to me. It was actually going to be meaningful. Luckily enough, being able to present in September of 2023, my experiences attending the summit created like a gateway for my university to start their Undocumented Students Week the year after that. Yeah, so a chain reaction just by this one email and this one person who sent me an application to attend the summit.
Amen. Amen. And thank you also for sharing, as it has already been mentioned, the experience of being in a mixed status family that many of our members of our communities know too well. I wondered, how has your work at your universities and colleges, you sort of mentioned it a little bit, connect the work to this Undocu network, and that could be answered by any of you.
So within the universities, there's a thing called Undocu Week. Whether universities have done it yet or not, they will eventually, I promise. That'll be our influence. It's basically a week on campus where you dedicate events towards advocating for immigrants on campus, bringing awareness to their stories, anything immigration related. And it wasn't until, Camila and hearing about LMU where I was able to meet some fellow students on campus, and I was able to put together the first Undocu Week. And the way that Undocu Network and Undocu Week has a connection is because through Undocu Network, you get to meet people like I wouldn't have been able to do with Camila and the other people that I met. So I was able to get ideas for fundraising events, for events of what we can do on campus, even for trying to get a scholarship started on campus for, documented or undocumented students. And the Undocu Network is really incredible with being able to provide resources. And there's other organizations that will sponsor even for you to do Undocu Network and t-shirts, fundraisers, and all of that. So it's really good connection.
I wonder, Camila, if you could talk a little bit about some of the highlights and work that has been done from this moment of creating this sort of national presence of Undocu Network. If you can share some of those highlights.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of components to the Undocu Network, and you've heard a bit about the summit, but I would like to break it down a little bit more because it can be kind of confusing. So the Undocu Network itself consists of the in-person aspects, where we have an annual in-person summit where we fly all of our members out to a retreat center and spend a whole weekend dedicated to various workshops, reflection, community building, that kind of stuff. So that happens in person. The other component that happens the rest of the time during the year is our virtual meetings that we have once a month. So these meetings, we as a committee plan them ahead of time and specifically ask for what the members want to see or learn or what resources would benefit them. So for example, in the past we've had a session where we invited two lawyers to just come, two lawyers that are obviously specialized in immigration rights and advocating for undocumented communities, come in to the workshop on Zoom and answer any questions that the members had. So this could be related to your own personal identity, if there's like specific questions you have about your status or any sort of renewals, if there's any questions that you have for your family in terms of pathways to citizenship, or even any concerns that you may have like in your life, how do I get a job, things like that, like what are the legal limitations and things you can do. So that was one workshop we had. We've also had other workshops where we've had panelists come in that represent various backgrounds within the undocumented community. So we have people that are either documented or fully undocumented or have moved on to receive their green card, come in and talk about their career development and pathways and the resources that they utilized based off of their identities in order to get where they are and build their own careers and lives. And what that looks like. Another thing we recently did, we had a mental health workshop in anticipation of the upcoming election, and this was led by Zoe, who's over there in the back. She is a current LMU student, shout out Zoe. But yeah, this workshop essentially was created by Zoe to allow us to reflect like on feelings with the upcoming election. And just sort of like digest like what is coming up for us, especially a lot of the rhetoric that's being used in the election right now that's targeting immigrant communities. So things like that we do online and try to maintain that throughout the year up until we get to see each other again in person. So those would be the main two highlights that we've had so far, I would say. Unless you guys have anything else to add.
Go ahead. Yes.
Just
even in a personal level, some of the highlights.
On a personal level, some of the highlights, I think that's a good question. So tying back to what I mentioned earlier, when one of the difficulties in just participating in Undocumented Network was not having the financial support from myself or from my, just from myself to attend the summit. And so one of my goals was to, if I was to continue working with Undocumented Network, that people from my institution, Boston College, wouldn't have to face that barrier. And so luckily, last year we had one person attending Undocumented Network from Boston College who received a similar kind of financial support from the same office that provided financial support for me 2 years ago. And so my hope in continuing that goal, because I'm never satisfied from just accomplishing one goal, is to continue doing that and to expand the number of people attending Boston College, representing Boston College to attend the next Undocumented Network Summit, which will be held in Chicago next year.
Amen. Amen. And Marina, I might ask the question a little bit different. Can you tell us why the Undocumented Network has been so important to you over the last couple of years?
I think for me, the biggest thing is just having a sense of community. As I mentioned, I didn't know anyone who had DACA status. I didn't know anyone who was undocumented. And even for me, I didn't know my true status up until my senior year of high school. And so when I found out, it was just kind of understanding what my status actually meant of having DACA, what was going on in the courtrooms, and being able to meet people who understood exactly what I was going through and the anticipations that we had, even renewing DACA. I mean, I learned through Jose got me connected with an attorney. I learned how to fill out my own DACA paperwork, and I didn't have to pay a lawyer to do it. I got to do it myself, but also just support in terms of, when I was adjusting my status this past year and having to go through that whole situation. But we have the best and biggest community and support system. And we are truly all best friends. I mean, the first year that Jonathan came, that was our second year. He joined right on. And everybody who comes in, we know everyone at the end of this 4-day weekend, and we stay in contact. We have each other's social media, but we meet on Zoom. We have a lot of, one-on-one mentorship. And for anyone who's part of the Undocu Core Committee, we have a few others. We're always available to be reached out to. If you need to be connected to anybody, if you need resources for something on campus, if you need resources to talk to an attorney, even for funds to do your DACA renewal. We have all of those resources, but we also have that community, especially with mental health. We go through a lot of things, mixed legal status or undocumented DACA. We go through so much that a lot of our friends who were born here don't understand, and that is truly the most beautiful thing about it, because it's like we have a separate community that really gets us on a level that others might not, and even our parents might not. With the parents who are in American, it might be a little bit different, but being able to talk to people our age and have this sort of friendship, I mean, it's beautiful. And then we literally have countdowns till we see each other every year between DC and then when we do our summits.
That's great. And one of the things you mentioned was this notion of raising awareness and education in a sense of community and solidarity in your own campuses, and you mentioned Undocu Week. And I wonder if those of you in the audience, if you have something similar to Undocu Week or exactly Undocu Week, could you raise your hand so we get a sense of that? Okay. Yeah, we have a few. And so maybe I'll come back to you, Camila, in terms of how do you see the network expanding? If you can think through the future of Undocu Network, what's the vision there?
Yeah, this is something we've been talking about a lot, especially as a core committee, but also just getting feedback from the general members at the summit in terms of how we want to grow and expand. One of the ways in which we have expanded was just inviting more mixed status individuals, and also strategizing for this upcoming summit how we want to create spaces for these different identities, right? Because being mixed status, being DACA, being fully undocumented, they're all very unique identities, even though they are under the sort of umbrella of immigration. We want to also validate how unique these experiences are and hold spaces, or for example, like small groups that are focused on these specific identities where you can talk about your experience with that, as opposed to speaking about it in a larger group where you maybe don't really understand the perspective of someone else, but we're also holding that space for people to talk about their own personal experiences. Another way we're expanding is we've also created a DEI chair that is co-led by Marina and Zoe, and we had done this because we, over the years, have come into situations where we don't want to exclude certain backgrounds within the immigrant community, right? So the rhetoric often, especially in the United States, especially in California, is that Latinos make up the majority of this group, right? And while there is data supporting that, we also don't want to exclude other communities that are part of the immigrant community, and especially want to welcome them into the Undocu Network to feel that this is a community they can join regardless of religion, of the country they were born in, et cetera, et cetera. So we created that position specifically to focus on the representation and just sort of uplift the diversity within the immigrant community. Other things too that we've been talking about are mentorship, even expanding to high school institutions within the Jesuit network, potentially helping in that sense, students that are undocumented in high school and thinking about applying to college. What does that look like? How do you write about that in your personal statement? What are financial aid concerns, things like that? It's very much in the works, ideas we're talking about, and Jonathan would be leading. But those are just some ways that we hope to expand and just broaden the community.
Amen. And maybe Jonathan, how about for you, from your perspective, how do you see this expanding in the future?
Yeah, touching base with, on the topic about expansion, one thing that Undocu Network as a well, us as a core committee for Undocumented Network, one thing that we're trying to do is make sure that the representation of all Jesuit universities are represented in all of our Undocumented Network events, whether that's coming from the in-person Undocumented Network summits, or even in the monthly meetings. As long as people who are attending the Undocumented Network Summit come from all the Jesuit universities, I think we're moving forward on that. Also, another way I can think of us expanding is to grow the number of delegates representing a university to attend our Undocumented Network Summit. Recently, our attendance rate has been around 30 to 40, and so we're hoping to aim for 50 participants next year, meaning bigger retreat center, more food, better times, more vibes. We'll see how that goes for high school students going into college in this room. If you guys are interested and think that you guys can qualify, just make sure to apply to a Jesuit institution, get in, and we can talk. But if not, we're still working on the high school mentorship component too.
Amen. And then Marina, for you, what are your sort of personal goals or your personal perspective within and beyond the network?
I think within the network, I really do love working on the DEI role. I think the beautiful part of Undocumented Network expanding is that we've had more religions, more languages, more cultures, more countries joining us, which I think is really beautiful. Because I think at the start, I was the only one who wasn't Latino. And so, as much as I love my Latino friends, but I think it's just beautiful when we have new people coming in and being able to talk about our different backgrounds. And one of our fan favorite events at the summit is when we do the map activity, and we ask people to locate on the map where they're from, and they have to share personal story from their country, a personal story of, I always share how my parents had met, a favorite recipe, anything like that. We just get to learn about each other, which is a really beautiful thing because, others may not know about certain religions or languages, recipes, anything like that. So definitely would love to keep working on the DEI role, especially with Zoe, and welcoming more and new people in. I'm also really passionate about the mentorship role, having community and being able to connect to people, being able to help them out if they need anything, if they need someone to talk to. And outside of the network, I just adjusted my status, so I'm really excited about that and hoping that I'm going to be able to finally travel, go back home when things calm down over there, and get to see the places I've always dreamt about and get to see my family. And also, as Jorge had mentioned, I was recently accepted to Belmont in Nashville, and my plan is to move there in the summer. I've got some friends down there already looking at couches and color schemes, and so I'm really excited about getting to move into a new city, meet new people, and go back to school because I actually miss that. And I'll be working in professional sports, so if anybody ever needs a connection, I'm here.
Amen. And I think we have time to open it up to questions from the audiences, and so audience members, and so start thinking about your questions, and I'm going to call here, and they call this an audible. Camila, you mentioned Dr. Cecilia Gonzalez Andreu, Latina theologian, former president of the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the United States. And maybe before we turn it over to the audience, if you could just share your perspective from working with her just a little bit more. And I'm sure she's very proud of you, but I wonder what she would say about this moment in your expansion and into the future. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Dr. Cecilia was very pivotal at LMU in terms of starting the Social Justice Scholarship for undocumented students, which provided 5 full rides at LMU for 5 students every school year. And that's something that I benefited from being there, as well as working with her closely with the Resilience Immigrant Rights Club and that kind of stuff. And I think, I think she'd be so proud of how, I don't know what's going on with the wall, but I think she'd be so proud of how big the Undocumented Network has gotten just from its inception of me and Jose just texting hey, you want to do this? What do you think? Is this even possible? Do we have money? and that kinds of stuff. But to seeing now, like, we're here at IFTJ talking about it, taking up space to, you know, share our own stories, but also, you know, share this resource with other people and grow the network itself. So I think she'd be really happy to see all of this.
Amen. And so with that, maybe we can turn it over to...
So if you have a question, just raise your hand. And
Can you introduce yourself too? Name, major.
School.
Hello. Thank you again for taking the time to share your words and your stories. It's very empowering. My name is Ori. I'm a junior at Stonehill College in Massachusetts. I'm a sociology major with a double minor in speech language pathology and criminology. And this is kind of more for Jonathan. I'm a U.S. citizen. My parents are they are permanent residents right now, and we're very close to reaching U.S. citizenship and getting their green card, which is very exciting for us as a family. So now that I'll be 21 next year, I'll have to begin doing kind of more of the advocacy work with that and just kind of advocating as to why they believe or why they belong in the U.S. They've been here for over 20 years. They're from Argentina. So when you kind of joined the Undocu network, I think you've kind of explained this a little bit, but could you kind of go further into like how you've been able to understand other statuses as a U.S. citizen yourself?
From when I joined Undocu Network forward, or whatever I have to say. Well, first and foremost, I think it takes a lot of courage to stand up and not only ask a question, but also represent your entire family and also share that exciting news. I think it's exciting news. A lot of times these kind of things can get normalized, but in my world, that's life-changing. So congratulations to your parents, first and foremost. I'm really thankful for that. Thankful for you and your family. I guess to answer your question, I'm still trying to grapple with this idea about how my life is like as a U.S. citizen growing up with so many people that didn't have the same status I did. Growing up, I guess the one way to paint it to you is just how I observe things. Because you don't just, like, when you're a little kid, you don't really know a lot of things. You just observe and then kind of learn from that, right? So as a little kid, I didn't know what status I had. I didn't know what legal status other people had. I didn't know what status legal status my parents had, my sisters had, my cousins, my neighbors. I grew up in a 12 apartment, 3-floor brick building for like the first couple of years. And I lived with so many people from Mexico, but I didn't know what their statuses were. All I knew was that they had certain values, and it was communicate with each other, be there for one another, be a person for others. And I think that's something that is very tied with my experiences. I'm still not, it sounds weird that I'm telling you these kind of things to answer your question, but if you get it, you get it, you know? But for people that, you know, to really answer the question, my parents did not have the traditional 9-to-5 work lifestyle, and I always wondered why they didn't have, you know, safer employment conditions. And I always wondered like what role the government had in affecting their lives on a daily basis. I always wondered these kind of questions, and also wondered why things were the way they were. Because of my wonders, I also was not sure like how much this impacted me until I got into college and I realized I'm a US citizen, and a lot of people I grew up with and a lot of people that raised me were not. That being said, it's still hard for me to know like my position with other people in the context of legal statuses, because it's so hard for me to just assume you're a citizen, you're not a citizen, you're me almost going to be a citizen. Like, it's more of those kind of discrete kind of things. But I think to answer your question, it's a learning process. I, up to today, feel like it's my status as a US citizen does not, it protects me, but my entire family isn't protected. So I'm making sure that my political views are centered around people political advocates who are dedicated to supporting immigrants, because people who raised me can't even vote and defend themselves. That's powerful, and I think that's why voting is so essential. And I think for people who are able to vote, vote for what you believe in, because your vote does matter. Because people who raised you may not even be able to vote, you know? So you hold so much strength with just that one little ticket. Again, I'm still learning how to navigate life as a US citizen, growing up in places and communities where not everybody has the same resources, access, statuses that I do. It's a learning process, but it's one where I just know that I have to consciously be aware of that, not make any comments, support somebody if I know how to in the best way possible. For example, like applying to colleges and stuff like that.
Hi. Oh, that was really loud. Sorry. My name is Amina Patron. I am from Cristo Rey, Brooklyn. I'm one of the theology teachers there. I went to UMass Boston, so shout out Boston. And I studied Latin actually there. So I majored in Latin and I minored in classical studies. My family's from Bosnia. We came here. I'm actually an immigrant from Bosnia. We had refugee status, so my immigration process probably looks a lot different than some other people's. We were able to get our citizenship a lot faster. My husband, he immigrated here from Brazil, and he was a DACA student. And I was just wondering if you could maybe expand. Some of my students had questions about what it means to be DACA. What does that status look like? What are the things that they can do versus they can't do? If you could just expand on that a little bit more. Thank you.
DACA. It stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival. It was started in the early 2010s, 2012. But yeah, by the Obama administration. And there was certain qualifications. You had to have come to the United States before, it was like January 2006, I think it was. You had to be a certain age when qualifying. What are the other, did you have to come with inspection or non-inspection? Doesn't that matter? Okay. There was some certain qualifications that you had to come, but you had to, it was basically like for the kids that were brought here as children who had no say, and obviously parents were bringing them here. With DACA, you have it for 2 years. You have to go and get your fingerprints done every 2 years. You have to do a renewal form every 2 years. And it gives you social security number, and it gives you a US work authorization card, so you can work legally in the United States. Also, that was the reason I was able to get a driver's license. I was able to get a real ID and be able to travel within the United States. You are not allowed to leave. You don't get government, federal aid when applying for colleges. For loans, you always need a cosigner. But you're able to, other than that, get a debit card. You can drive. Yeah, that's a really big one. To drive. Each state had their own certifications for getting like the real ID. I know every time I went, I always had to argue with Michigan, and they would try to tell me no, and I'm like, I promise you I can get it, and then I got it. But yeah, you have to renew it every 2 years, and the biggest thing about DACA is that it's not a pathway to citizenship. The way that a green card is, you have to have a green card for 5 years. You can apply for citizenship, but DACA is not a pathway to citizenship, and that was always kind of the biggest problem with it. Do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, essentially it's like a temporary protection from deportation is what it is. So it basically is an application that separates, adults or parents from the children, and essentially puts them at the bottom of the list for any sort of deportation proceedings, right? So the government has said that you are not a priority for us, and you have been granted these protections, as Marina mentioned. Another component of DACA is also that you can apply to leave the country under this file of advanced parole. But there are only 3 reasons that you would be allowed to leave the country. So one of them being for a family emergency, one of them being for education, so if you were to do a study abroad program, and another, the third one is for humanitarian purposes, so if you were to do some sort of volunteering program outside of the country. But again, this also comes with costs, a lot of time, submitting these applications to USCIS, submitting evidence of what you're doing, and then getting this, the advanced parole paper that you present when you return back to the country, which is also not guaranteed. Advanced parole is a paper that says we can also say no at any point, like if depending on who you get, what they see, etc. I have personally have done advanced parole in the past. I don't know, have you done advanced parole? Oh yeah, Marina did. We have various members that have, and like we have helped each other sort of navigate that process as well, because there are very many nuances and details that are critical. But yeah, as Marina mentioned, it's definitely not a pathway to citizenship. It just kind of keeps us in a limbo of like, we'll give you a couple rights, but not all of them. And it's also such a small number of people that benefit from it. It's about 80,000 people that benefit from the DACA program. Meanwhile, we have estimated 14 million undocumented people in the United States. So it's a very, very small amount of people, and that's why we really do advocate for different pathways to citizenship, such as updating the Registry Act, which Jose can talk to you more about in his breakout sessions tomorrow, perhaps. But yeah, it's definitely not permanent, and also has been going through the court system recently. There has been one of the final hearings a few weeks ago or last week about DACA, so potentially the ending of that program, also considering the upcoming election, who will be in office.
I think we have one more question down here.
Good evening. My name is Julian Bojorquez Mesa. So I currently attend Brophy College Prep High School in Phoenix, Arizona. So my question for y'all is, I come from a mixed status family, right? I am a citizen. My parents are dreamers, and they came here when they were younger, obviously, dreamer status. I want my parents, they're very young, I want them to grow old in a place where they're not treated differently because of the immigration status they hold. What are some of the ways you guys would help people like my parents who aren't necessarily college students, but are still DACA recipients?
I think with the Undocu network specifically, it is targeted at sort of a young adult college age group. Like, we have an age range of 18 to 30, but I mean, we have some people a little over 30, but, which is okay, right? We're very flexible in that sense, but it's also, I'm not looking at Jose, but it's okay, I'm getting up there too. In terms of like past 30, like adulthood, like people with children, that kinds of stuff, like we haven't really talked about that as a committee in terms of the Undocu network. And I can only speak from personal experience of, experience with my parents or things like that, but just with those specific groups, like finding community resources, like for example, your local like community law centers, or usually affiliated with colleges or things like that that provide free legal services or consultations for people that are undocumented or have DACA. That's one way to go about it. Also, the nonprofit organizations that specifically work with immigrant communities, so things like United We Dream, Immigrants Rising, Cheerla, they're all organizations that are focused on, more broadly the immigrant experience, and also have various resources for how to create your own business, like with your identification number if you don't have Social Security, navigating like getting a house or renter rights and things like that. So I would definitely point them towards those resources, but that is something that we're, we can expand so much with this network, right? Like there's so many layers to it, there's so many identities within it, and yeah, that's a really great question. I wish I could provide more, but that's the best I can do.
Do we have time for committee?
We have time for one more question.
Okay, one more question. Okay.
Hello, my name is Scarlett Peralta. I come from Mercy University. It's out in Pennsylvania. I have a question regarding one of the questions that was asked that was expanding the network. And I'd say, what are the obstacles you see in helping undocumented students apply for college, as well as mixed status students? And just in regards to like what steps you see yourself taking with the network to allow that to happen.
So I can talk on behalf of my experiences as somebody who is a U.S. citizen but grew up with people who weren't. To answer the first part of your question, what are some challenges that make students in high school with mixed status backgrounds experience when applying to college? One is for me personally, I had to fill out the FAFSA, just to get federal financial aid. And in doing so, I needed to have that conversation with my parents about what's your social security number, and they are very reserved about disclosing any confidential information, regardless of what it is. But to like step into that kind of like that kind of area and tell them it's not to like get you in trouble, but it's for my education, it's for my future. They still were very reserved about disclosing that information. So I don't think I'm the only person that has that kind of experience, because I know, there's other people here who have mixed status backgrounds and could attest to that. So I think that's a challenge that I'm not the only one facing. Another challenge could be something as simple as who's gonna pay for college? Because I think there is some association between the places mixed status families grew up in, like in terms of socioeconomic status and their legal status, So that being said, I didn't know how I was going to pay for college, and my mom was like, I got you. And I'm like, you don't know how much it is. Like, you're only looking at the cost of attendance for 1 year and it's 5 figures, multiply that by 4, that's too much. I got it. And that was a challenge too, because when you tell yourself, I'm going to pay for my own education, not knowing how much the depth is, it's a big challenge. That in itself, just the thought, and then having to figure out the numbers, getting the numbers in front of you, it's like another challenge too. So I think, just to sum it up on that second part, funding your education, planning ahead is a challenge. I did that. I helped my little sister apply to college, and even then she still struggled on choosing the right college because she didn't know which one was the most feasible one. She's now currently commuting from home to a local state university because it's the most, not only was it like her best choice financially, but it was her best choice academically. So it's like just also too, like finding the right guidance for, attending college is also a factor too. I do think that several people with mixed status backgrounds don't have that, second gen, third gen background. They most likely have that first gen background like me. So I couldn't, for example, ask my family, where'd you go to college? Brown, Yale, a community college. They didn't graduate high school. So like, I think that in itself too, there's so many layers that aren't legal based that are tied with one's legal status, and it's difficult. It's frustrating for me to even think about it, but I think that just sums up like the general gist of what challenges people with mixed status backgrounds have when applying to college. What we're trying to do as an organization on that aspect, when we're doing the mentorship component, is help high schoolers navigate that process a little bit more smoothly. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes patience, it takes a lot of communication, but all it takes is an idea, a lot of effort, and a lot of fight to make some, plan like this come through. And, we could be called delusional for even thinking that we can set up a mentorship program where we're supporting high school students with similar backgrounds get into college and thrive. But if the thought's there, it's possible. And I hope that answers the question.
There was someone back in the back that was patiently waiting. I think the mic's.
It's okay. So my name is Giovanni Villatoro. My mom has United States status, but my dad was deported when I was 6 months old. And so even then, he hasn't been able to receive status after about 15, 16 years. My question is, how can high school students, even if it's not under your guys' potential mentorship, how can we start something for our community in terms of like starting a network type of community? What were the first steps that you guys took, or what are the first steps that we can take?
First off, thank you so much for being so brave and sharing that information. And I think at the high school level, things you can do, steps you can take, is first finding your people that would be interested, that would support you, that will create this with you. And secondly, how do you tie it to the institution? How do you tie it to that high school? Who are potential people that are staff or faculty at the school that could support you institutionally? That is, being the advisor for the group that you are creating, right? Because then they have leverage to ask for funding from the school. They have leverage in terms of scheduling with the school. Do you need classrooms at, once a week, 6 p.m. is when you're going to be meeting, right? Like that sort of scheduling the advisor can help with. And other things, I think the most important things are the people that are going to help you build this, and then the administrators that will also support you. And then from there, you can just grow and expand. So strategizing ideas in terms of what do you want your group to look like at your campus? Do you want it to be a weekly meeting? What would the meetings talk about? Are you going to have workshops? Are you going to bring in speakers? Are you going to do information nights? Just like catching up with all the crazy legal stuff that's happening in the country right now. Other things you can do to take care of yourself. You can have events. We also focus a lot on self-care and mental health. What are events you can have to also center yourselves and your experiences and not, prevent the burnout of getting lost in this sort of, constant battle with the U.S. legal system. And then from there, just expanding to honestly whatever your group wants out of the experience and what you want your school to learn from. For example, creating an immigration awareness week or a docu week, that kind of stuff, where you have workshops for the rest of your campus to learn from. Another thing that we have seen at a lot of campuses, shout out LMU, they've been doing this too, but they've been having undocu ally trainings led by Maria and the Undocumented Student Center, where they train other faculty and staff what it means to be an undocu ally for these students. That's something that can also be student-led, but also putting that pressure as students on the administrators to do that learning, right? Because you're also students. You have to be in class, you have to start applying to colleges, et cetera, et cetera. You have your own lives and own loads to carry, but I think those would be like the first things that come to mind in order to get started.
Awesome. Well, let's give a round of applause for our panelists and our moderator. Thank you once again to our sponsors, Boston College, Clough School of Theology and Ministry, and the Jesuit Conference, Canada of the United States, the Office of Justice and Ecology. Real quick, so our panelists, I know that folks have more questions, and so as we wrap up, like if you have a burning question, our panelists will be here for a couple of minutes, right? We can talk, we can share our contact information with you if you have questions moving forward. I just quickly wanted to highlight one or two other events happening this weekend, right? If you have additional questions, right? Maybe you were really motivated in hearing our speakers talk about some of the advocacy that we participated in, and maybe you have just questions about like, how can I take the information that I've learned today and like learn more, right? If you're going into advocacy meetings on Monday, there is a session happening tomorrow being led by former ISN staff, current Churla staff, Jose, on the Registry Act. If you have questions about pathways to citizenship and federal legislation and advocacy. Another session happening tomorrow, if you have more if you are wanting to learn more about what it means to be undocumented in this country, there's going to be a screening of a documentary and a Q&A panel tomorrow during Breakout Session 3, so after lunch tomorrow. Another workshop to consider attending. And if you have more questions about the Undocu Network, what we do, what we are planning on doing, we talked a lot about the summit. If you have questions about the summit, again, our panelists are going to be here to answer questions. We also have some QR codes that you can scan, learn a little bit more about us, go to our website that I may or may not have spent a lot of hours this week, our Instagram. You heard it here, folks. Well, thank you all so much for being, give yourselves a round of applause.